So what you do on your little part of the web of weird kind of vibrates out to, you know, into all eternity. And I think that's the same with the labyrinths. And one of the things I was taught by my teacher, Grassi, in Spain, is that wherever you put a labyrinth, you get peace there. And that you can't walk a labyrinth angry. I've tried, you can't. You can start stomping in, but by the time you've reached that center, your body's relaxed, your mind is flowing, your heart rate has come down. You know, your blood pressure is lowering. You can't walk one of those things angry.
Welcome to the Golden Thread podcast, and we're really happy to have you here. And we'd love to hear a little bit about you and what your thoughts are. Particularly, I think you're wanting to speak around ritual and the labyrinth.
Yes.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on that and have a conversation. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so yeah, I am interested in labyrinths. Have been working with labyrinths now for probably the best part of 20 years. And that kind of came in the back of the pagan path that I walk. So I was teaching in the Basque Country in northern Spain, maybe 20 years ago, teaching all things pagan, druidry and witchy out there. And the lady whose group I was teaching, who are a group of Spanish druids, had a labyrinth, a cloth canvas labyrinth in the corner of the room. And I kind of knew about them, but didn't really know much about them. And during the weekend that I was teaching, it was calling to me. And in the end, I said, how do I walk this? What is this? I know it's a labyrinth, but what's the principle behind it? So in her break, my Spanish is awful, her English isn't great, but between us, we kind of had a really cool understanding. And through a translator friend of hers, they told me how they used the labyrinth. And they invited me to walk it during a long lunch hour. They like their siestas out in Spain, so a long lunch hour. And so I walked it as instructed. And I felt an energy just come over me that was so deeply emotional that it shook me to the very core. And I began to cry. And I don't cry, but I began to cry. And first of all, it was just watery eyes and just a few tears. I mean, as the emotion welled up, by the time I reached the center of the labyrinth, I was crying like a baby, proper blubbing, hiccuping, sobbing, snotty, very, very attractive. And I got to the middle and I'm like, what the hell is going on? What is happening? And Grassi said to spend time in the center. When you're ready, follow the path back out. And I could barely see the path back out because I was tearful. And when I got out of there, I was very stunned at the reaction that I had. And to this day, I couldn't tell you what it was that I released in the labyrinth, but I released a lot. And I felt it as I was coming back out of the labyrinth. I felt a lightness. I felt as though whatever it was that I was holding on to was just melting away in the arms of the labyrinth, particularly as I stood at the center cross. We use I primarily work with the classical 7 paths. And rather than just going up into the last path and out, we're taught that we stand on the cross center of the labyrinth, a foot either side. So you feel the energy going up and down and through you, you become that conduit. And as you stand at that center, you can see the arms of the labyrinth as you're facing the path in, the arms of the labyrinth is folding around you. And I felt really, really held. And like I said, to this day, I have no idea what it was I was releasing, but I felt great afterwards. And since then, I have become obsessed with labyrinths. So during my career, I was a pagan prison chaplain for 12 years. And I had 2 labyrinths built in two prisons. And I used to take my canvas labyrinth into prisons and work with prisoners on the labyrinth, which they all loved. You know, I worked in 6 or 7 different prisons in the southwest of the UK, and my labyrinth has followed me wherever I've gone. And it's been amazing because the prison staff have seen the benefits of working with prisoners on the labyrinth. And then they've gone into the labyrinth themselves as staff and they felt the benefits. even though they're not sure what those, what's really happening, they feel a sense of peace and they feel a sense of surety. So my connection with labyrinths has come from a long magical life of about 40 years practicing my own particular spirituality. And the last 20 years, I've been really working with labyrinths within that spirituality, which is why when I was listening to your podcast around ritual, I was very lucky. I had a month's holiday in Costa Rica and I was on the beach in the sunshine listening to your podcast. And I'm like, rituals in labyrinths? Of course. I do this all the time. So that's a kind of not so brief introduction.
No,
but
that's a lovely. That's a wonderful experience to hear about, especially, Dylan and I have talked a lot about how people seem to stumble upon labyrinths. It's not often that you learn about it first and then go and find.
Yeah, I agree.
It seems that people stumble on.
Even if you are introduced to a labyrinth, both Mike and Alan would say that they were more or less introduced to the labyrinth by me. It's still your stumbling upon it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and once they get you, they've got you.
Yeah, and to something you said about prisons, there's a lot of what we might call woo-woo spirituality on the West Coast, on the in Glastonbury, of course.
Absolutely.
And I'm saying that with all affection.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That would be a turnoff in a lot of scenarios for a lot of groups. And there's something about the labyrinth, I think, that protects it somewhat from that cynicism, or there may be some people that say, oh, I don't get it, for sure. Yeah. But there are very few people that will experience it. And there's something cool about it, it's history, it's simplicity, that I think protects it from the traditional forms of, oh, I'm not one of those people.
And I think because it goes through all faiths and none. The labyrinth doesn't belong to a faith. It doesn't belong to a spirituality. We are, as I said, our local church has a beautiful labyrinth in the front of it that was built maybe 15 years ago by a guy called Sig Longren, a fellow American who's written some really cool books on labyrinths. I can fully recommend his work. It doesn't belong to any spirituality. You can walk it with any faith or none. For people, when I run, we do a lot of one-day labyrinth retreats just to introduce people. And I say, look, you can walk this with your spirituality. I have mine, and I can tell you about it, but you walk it with yours. And if you have no sense of that, then you walk it to yourself, your higher self. You engage with your higher self with that. You don't need to have a spirituality or a belief system to walk a labyrinth. And I can honestly say, in all the years with all the people that I've introduced a labyrinth to, there is not one person that has walked off a labyrinth and gone, well, I don't get that.
Right. That would two things to say. One would be that is, if you do run into that person, it's a person that has some deep learning they need to do for where, and you do meet some people that truly, for me, this has always been, quite frankly, my greatest fear, like the idea that my students would grow up without depth, without, and it doesn't happen much. You don't need to count on your teachers or the labyrinth to give people depth in this world.
Absolutely.
They're going to have complexity, but there's just this sense that there are a few people that truly cannot dip into that well and pull something out of it. And, there's not much you can do about that. Yeah, go for it, Alan.
Apparently my buttons aren't working on this unless you let me get unmuted.
Yeah, we've just got sound in the background, so I keep.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Cut me out when you can. I apparently don't have full capabilities on my phone right now. So one of the things that you were sharing there about nobody having ownership over it, kind of a flip side to that from my experience as a Christian pastor, is I often felt like the first step to teaching anybody anything was to help them unlearn that I have the answer. And
Yeah.
because the answer isn't in me, and even from the Christian standpoint, we're told, no, you don't look outside of yourself because the kingdom of heaven is within you. So there's this interesting thing where, yeah, I feel like the ways that many faith systems have kind of taken possession over the essentials of what is just human, kind of that ownership thing has held us back from truly dipping into the ritual that these tools provide, like the labyrinth, which is
I
just
agree.
so archetypally human and fundamentally part of the experience. It describes and allows us to feel that embrace from the universe. I feel like that's what you're sharing, that embrace or hug from the labyrinth that you shared about. I love what you shared there. That's beautiful.
I think one of the most beautiful experiences I've had from working from a multi-faith point of view, when I was working in prison, I was working as part of a large multi-faith team within which every faith that you can think of was represented: Muslims, Hindus, various denominations of Christians, Catholics, you name it, Buddhists. They were all represented. And I did a labyrinth walk where each chaplain walked the labyrinth together. And that was phenomenal because we all found comfort. We all found similarity within our paths, no matter which path we were walking, what our idea of the Godhead is. We all found similarity within the paths of the labyrinth. And that for me was truly magical in the sense, in the proper sense, not the woo-woo sense of magical, but we found that loving embrace from the divine in whichever way we connected to that. And then when we came out and had discussion around that, we were all using similar language, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, I had a question sort of that we ponder a lot on the episodes and off. But my question is basically, what is it for you about the labyrinth? There are ritual experts. You might consider yourself to be one of them, but putting a ritual here, there. What is it about the labyrinth that, forget it being applicable to all religions and including atheism, but how is it that it is so adaptable to particular uses on a ritual level? Do you have any sense on that?
Yeah, so for me, it's purely a liminal space, the labyrinth. So every time you step into a labyrinth, you're stepping into that sense of liminality, that space of in between. And for many people might say to me, oh, do you know what? Because I've painted my own 4 meter by 4 meter cloth labyrinth, and people say to me, it's just a cloth with some paint on it. Yes, of course it is. That's all it is. Now walk it and come out and tell me that's just a cloth with some paint on it. It's a liminal space, and I think people really feel that, and they feel that the labyrinth acts on every aspect of their humanity. And I've seen people come out of the labyrinth going, what has just happened to me? Now, I can't always explain that to them, but I can say you need to sit with that and maybe meditate on that. So for me, the sense of liminality that the labyrinth allows us to experience is really important. And liminality and ritual go quite hand in hand together, I think. So for me, we might use the labyrinth during some of our more pagan rituals as a metaphorical walk to the other world. So we are connecting to our sense of the other world. And if we do that, we'll walk straight into, we'll walk the labyrinth, we'll stand at the center. Sometimes we might want to call in aspects of the divine as we see it, or it might be that we're working at a certain time of year when we might be honoring our dead, particularly around Halloween, Samhain. So we might walk to the other world through the labyrinth, stand on the cross quarter, think about our loved ones that have passed, and rather than walking out of the labyrinth, walking straight off, and maybe spending time with our loved ones that have passed. And then when we're ready, we might share food, we might share tea, we might share something with them. When we're ready, we go back onto the cross and we begin our walk back out. So it's a ritual of deliberately entering into a different space. So if the labyrinth enhances, which I believe, every emotion that we can feel and everything we do within it, it aids us as well through deep meditation. And meditation can change our brainwaves so that we're much more perceptive to what I might call the other. Now, the labyrinth amplifies that. So for me, if I'm working in ritual, that's one of the connections I have with the labyrinth. It amplifies the teachings that I have already taken from various teachers that I've had, and enables me to access the other, whether that's the other in the divine or the other within myself. Because we have a belief that, you know, God within, God without. So it depends how you look at that. But that's one of the biggest things for me, is the liminality of the labyrinth and using it with forethought and insight to create a state of being or practice that you wish to develop or be part of.
First off, I want to write that down after this, because that was so well said,
Thank you.
and not rehearsed either. You know, like there's that genuine sense, for people that are watching this in the future. If you aren't familiar with the concept of liminality, if you think of the word limbo, I think Victor Turner calls it the betwixt and between, where we have this. You know, you can have liminality in all aspects. So, you know, there are liminal illnesses. You're not heading toward death, and you're not heading toward wellness, and people get very uncomfortable with that. But it is a place of transformation and community. And so, well said, the liminality. But I would also add the sense of prepackaged sacred space.
Yes,
You can
absolutely.
draw a box or a circle in the ground if you're teaching an elementary school class, and humans pick up on it so quickly. But this is so much sacred space wrapped up into so small an area, that, you know, it really does something, I think, in that aspect.
I think one of the things I love as well is that it has the potential for labyrinths to exist, particularly the seven path classical, to exist infinitely. It's the cosmos. You keep putting those little corners in, and, you know, more and more and more and more. It has the potential of existing throughout all time and all space. And one of the things that I really like about it is I quite like, and my husband follows quite a Norse tradition, and he talks about the web of weird, WYRD. And for me, the labyrinth really expresses the idea of weird on so many different multi-dimensions for me, that you can access that. So what you do on your little part of the web of weird kind of vibrates out to, you know, into all eternity. And I think that's the same with the labyrinth. And one of the things I was taught by my teacher, Grassi, in Spain, is that wherever you put a labyrinth, you get peace there. And that you can't walk a labyrinth angry. I've tried, and you can't. You can start stomping in, but by the time you've reached that center, your body's relaxed, your mind is flowing, your heart rate has come down. You know, your blood pressure is lowering. You can't walk one of those things angry, and that is another aspect of the labyrinth that I like. It can really change how somebody feels about situations. So I'm probably waffling, so do forgive me. But when I was working in prison, the first prison I ever worked in, I was a volunteer. And it was a really old prison called Shepton Mallet, only 189 lifers. They were all settled into their long sentences. And there was a younger guy there, maybe in his early 20s, mid to late 20s rather. Bit of an artist. I put the labyrinth down for the first time. He was one of the few people that said to me, and he was a Romany gypsy lad, and he just went, "That's just a bit of canvas with paint on it, miss. There's no way I can feel all these things that you say I'm going to feel." Okay, it's fine. If you don't feel anything, that's absolutely okay. So I play some lovely music, and it just happened to be some quite Celtic-y, evocative music in the background. He started to walk it. He was holding onto his thumbs. His body language was all tight, and you could see his face was set. This isn't going to work. By the time he got to the center, and this is so beautiful, I watched his body relax. I watched him find his gait, his rhythm and his meter within the labyrinth, because that's hard sometimes for people to find that rhythm, particularly with mine, because the paths are quite narrow. So he started to relax. He got to the center. He stood as I instructed. And I love synchronicity, or is it magic? Well, that's another discussion. As he stood at the center, the CD that I was playing just changed to an Irish lullaby. Simple. His eyes flew open. He looked at me, he swore, and I said, "What's up?" And he went, "Oh my God, my grandmother used to sing this song to me when I was a wean, and she's been dead these last 10 years. And from that moment onwards, that young man, who's still in prison, became such an advocate of the labyrinth that he, you know, and it was just amazing to see how he's gone in tense, wound up, not thinking anything about it, to the point where he was in tears because he remembered his grandmother, and the labyrinth allowed him to be in that space where he could cry, which they don't often do in prison, but he could cry. So for me, that's part of the magic. We talk about magic, and I can talk about magic on one level as a pagan, but it's the magic of the labyrinth that belongs to everybody. And that just flows through us all so beautifully. That really connects me to it.
One of the things that comes out of my faith system with the idea of magic or miracles is that many of the miracles that are happening are just happening so commonly that we've lost track of how miraculous this world really is. And when we can step into that more liminal space, that almost the beauty of our inner world opens up, and we can I don't know, experience that in a different way. It was interesting what you shared there. Reminded me a lot of a memorial service. The very first service I officiated at was my brother-in-law, who suffered from schizophrenia and eventually was able to take his life. And we're doing the service, and we had the music all completely set up, and all somebody needed to do was hit play on it. And when somebody hit play, of all songs, I Fell Into a Burning Ring of Fire started playing. And his father starts cracking up and goes, "Oh, Carl's pulling one off on us again." And it was just so relieving for the entire service. And nobody could have made that happen. It was totally accidental or magical or something from the other side, you know. And that when we provide space through ritual, which is the point of what I'm getting to, where we are open to things that are more than just our senses, I think that we get to experience it on a more profound level than we are expecting.
And again, that's part of the magic of the labyrinth, isn't it? Is allowing people to have those moments.
And that experience, I can almost guarantee it's not just that it wasn't set up by anyone. In a weird way, I can almost guarantee that if someone had set that music to play, it would have been taken in a insult. You know, it would have ruffled feathers. It would have, right? Because it's not even about being hubristic, but an ego. An ego choice would have been so much more, so much less transformative than the synchronicity that happens around ritual of any sort.
I agree. And I think one of the other rituals that we did fairly recently was around my business partner and myself, Darren. We're both Solution Focused Hypnotherapists. And whilst I did his training 3 or 4 years ago, I did my training last year. And as I'm listening to the workings of the brain and brain waves and how hypnotherapy works and meditation, in my head, I'm going, tick, Labyrinth does that, tick, Labyrinth does that, all the way through. So we started to run some very simple workshops around grief and anxiety. So a lot of our workshops are around the natural, what we call the wheel of the year. So spring, summer, autumn, winter, they're beautiful. But this was taking all of that out of it, so that people who didn't consider themselves spiritual in particular might want to come and explore grief on the labyrinth. They might want to come and explore anxiety. So we have a whole thing that we do for this, but one of the small little rituals, there's always rituals in it. One lady had lost her mother maybe a year before, and it had been a really difficult relationship. And there was a lot of stuff going on, and there was things that hadn't been said and that she wanted to talk about, really. So we set up the Labyrinth and laid it out, played some nice music. And the idea was I put a simple china cup and saucer in the center and a teapot of tea. Very British, lovely. And I simply asked her to walk into the Labyrinth. And when she got to the center, my labyrinth is split into quarters of north, south, east, and west. So in my tradition, west is the land of the dead. So I asked her just to sit and watch, face the west of the labyrinth, where there was a second cup of tea already poured. And so she poured hers. The second one was for her mum. And we just gave her the space to talk and say the things that she wanted to say, a simple cup of tea, because it's something so she would have done with her mother many, many, many times during life. It wasn't big and scary, even though it was a ritual. It was something so simple. And the ritual of making tea and drinking tea with your friends and gossiping and talking is a ritual within itself. And she had her time in the labyrinth talking to mum. And when she came out after the workshop, she came to me and said, I feel so much clearer. And I feel that something has literally lifted off my shoulders. And I feel there's peace. So the labyrinth can be designed to have the simplest rituals, like having a cup of tea with somebody that's departed that you want to talk to having the much more complicated rituals that I've done for initiations, weddings. I've done baby naming ceremonies on there. I've done funerals on labyrinths. So they lend themselves to absolutely everything, the simple and the more complicated.
Yeah, I sort of wanted to touch on that. Something that's coming up again and again from you that I've seen with the Labyrinth experience in general, joining this community and really getting more, we've got a pretty fast track rise in Labyrinth obsession, which happens to a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, even if I have 10 years of Labyrinth activity to some degree, it's still very new in some other ways, certainly in the deep dive. But one of the things I initially feared was Labyrinth purists. And I just don't think they really exist.
I don't.
Other than some people that are brand new at it and maybe hubristically think that they have a handle on it, or, you can't use it, Labyrinth, that way. So that one ritual you talked about of purposefully leaving from the center and then doing stuff and maybe coming back later.
Yeah.
It's ludic. Ludic playfulness, like a purposeful willingness to say, this is an archetypal form that we can't hurt, we can't damage it. We're not going to hurt the labyrinth. The labyrinth we are meaning making machines, so we are simply harnessing a certain power there. So I love that as well with the teacups, that you can't do wrong walking the labyrinth, you can't do wrong setting up a ritual.
And I was taught quite a specific way of walking a labyrinth, but I always say to people, there's no wrong way to walk a labyrinth. This is how I was taught, and I quite like walking this way. But, and I'll pass this on to you. But if it doesn't feel right for you, then you find your way of walking. So one of the things I like about the teacher that I had, Grassi, 20 years ago, was that before we enter a labyrinth, and this is her tradition, you bow 3 times. And the first bow is to honor all the paths, right and wrong, that you have walked. The second is to honor all the paths you are walking. And the third is to honor all the paths you will walk. And I really like that. So you make your 3 bows, you walk, you come out, and as you come out of the last path back in, you back out of the labyrinth, the last few steps. So you're not turning your back on the center, and you bow in thanks again. And the idea of that is wonderful because you're honoring yourself, past, present, and future. And that means you're also honoring all the mistakes you've made, all the bad turns and choices that you've made, because that has led you to the path you are walking now. So it's a way of forgiveness, I suppose, on one level for the wrongs that you've done, but also it's a way of honoring yourself for all the right choices that you've made. And I really like the simplicity of that. And that in itself becomes a tiny ritual, your 3 bows before you go in and your 3 bows as you come out. That's a tiny ritual that you can incorporate, which I think is wonderful. And a lot of my solution focused hypnotherapy clients, often I suggest finger labyrinths. And what I might say to them of an evening is, before you go to bed, sit in bed, trace your finger around the labyrinth, thinking about the good things that have happened to you today, giving gratitude, what's been good today. Because many people they come to me, they're stuck in some form of stress or anxiety. So what's been good today? When they get to the center, I just say, take your finger off, don't trace your finger out, put the labyrinth down by your bedside, and go to sleep in that liminal space. And then when you wake up in the morning, pick the labyrinth up, put your finger in the center, and decide what's going to be good today as you trace your way out again. And that is lovely, because then they can then record how they feel and then bring that back to me at their next session. And they can start to see how even doing a simple finger labyrinth can be so healing.
Wonderful.
I'm loving this. You're giving me so many ideas of, yeah. I'm really quite new to Labyrinths. This is really, other than a few years ago, walking the one that Dylan introduced me to up in Canada. And I realized about a decade ago, I stumbled on one in Bath, in the west of England. But yeah, being
I know. Is
so
that
new.
one? Is that Silbury Hill, the one on the hill?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So the picture that I had on here, I don't think you saw it. There's a little picture of me walking a labyrinth as my little icon on here, and that's the same labyrinth.
Oh,
Wow.
that's funny. Yeah, I was going through some pictures, old pictures, and I went, huh, I didn't realize I had completely forgotten that I stumbled on it. I didn't really know what it was.
And you do stumble on that labyrinth, because I had no idea it was there,
No.
because it's on the side of the hill. If you could walk past it and you would never see it.
Yep.
So yeah, it's beautiful.
So being so new, I had that same feeling that Dylan was talking about. Am I allowed to do this when I'm designing labyrinths as an artist? I got really into how when I enter in and I start designing, I'll start with, where do I want my entrance, and where do I want, or of course the entrance into the holy inner sanctum. And then I start thinking of an intention that I want to set, and often I'll just do a free design and figure out where are my dead ends, how do I have to backtrack, trying to think ahead. But I started worrying about, am I allowed to do these things? So hearing some of the ways that you're using the labyrinth and suggesting rituals with it just opens my mind to so many possibilities that I've not yet felt free to explore in many ways. And I think it's just a matter of more conversations like this with other people that I just don't know yet. And I'm so excited for the path that this the labyrinth is bringing us on.
The labyrinth allows us to explore every part of ourselves. You know, it allows us to look at every part. And I think the only thing that stops you working anything in the labyrinth is your imagination.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you don't have the imagination to design and build upon the things that you know, I think of new rituals almost on a weekly basis. And I could do that. Oh, that would really work. How would that work? What might that look like?
Yeah.
And I'm just using the 7 paths. That's
Right.
the only one I really use. And one of the other things. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and people respond to that too.
Oh yeah.
They can tell that you're being playful with it, you know, that you're willing to, you know, to sort of bend the rules a little, and
There
they
are
want
no
to join
rules.
in that.
You see, I don't
That's
think
the
there
thing.
are any rules. There are no rules. How, you know, it would be really interesting if we all lived in the same area to go along and see how, you know, you guys work with it and how I work with it. And the beauty of that is I might turn around and go, oh, what Alan did just, I like that. I'm gonna pinch that. I'm gonna put that in mine. And that's the beauty of it. It's because it's such a universal symbol, and because it has the ability to exist in all and everything, you can't fill it up. There's room for expansion, there's room for new ideas, and I love learning from other people. You never stop learning, do you? Or you shouldn't stop learning.
Well, that brings me to maybe a way that we should wind this down. For me, visually, that really does come down to this transcendent function. Whether you use Jungian vocabulary or Christian vocabulary or pagan vocabulary or psychology, modern wellness psychology, we know there's something different in the center. And whether it's Jacob's ladder or Yggdrasil in the Norse tradition, the world tree at the center of that labyrinth, that's why there's unlimited space. For some people, that may be a well, picturing that there's an endless groundwater table that you're drawing this stuff from and that it can hold. Or you might think that verticality upward, where it is just this cone of transformative power that we're just barely able to tap into. Or yet again, from a more, let's say, Celtic tradition, that sort of fairy or fae other world where you're
otherworldly.
You're tapping through the veil. And so, of course, there's an endless stream of energy we can't see coming through that central point.
And it's beautiful. And I think also within the way that I was taught, there's a way that you can place the 5 Celtic elements within the labyrinth of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And I really like that. And I can see people really connecting to that. So the first path you walk in is fire. So for instance, if you've got a problem, let's go back to maybe prison. They might be coming up for parole or something like that, and they don't really know what's going on. Or anyone's got a problem, doesn't know what they need to do. So you might make your 3 bows and you'll walk into the first path, which is fire. And you might ask fire to give you the courage that you need to face the issues that you're facing. And then you'll go into the next path, which is water. And that's the inner path of water. So that's your deeper emotions. How do I connect to my deeper emotions? How do I share these with the people that I might need to share these emotions with? Then you go into the second path, which is also the second path of water, the outer path. That's your outer emotions. Are these balanced? Am I being honest with myself? You'll then go back into fire, which is then going, okay, I might need to make change and transformation in my life. Maybe the labyrinth can help me see or ease into change. We don't like change, we're creatures of habit. And then you go, hang on, I've got to make sure I've got it right. Then you go into the smallest path, which is earth. We're creatures of earth. It's the tiny little path on the labyrinth. And that's where we can ask for grounding. I want to be grounded. I want to be aware of my body and who I am. And then you'll go into the next 2 paths, which are air. And when you'll come up to the U path, the last one, which we call spirit. And that is your connection with spirit. And then we turn clockwise and we stand on the cross, which is at the center of you. And that's where you might receive messages from spirit, your higher self, your own intuition, and you can incorporate all the elements onto the labyrinth for any issue. And then as you come out, you're bringing out everything that you've learned and heard within that walk, and you're consolidating it all until you back out and you make your 3 bows and you write down what it is you've experienced. So working with the elements in the labyrinth is really powerful, and you don't have to be pagan to do it.
No, it reminds me very similar processes as I've been developing some around the chakra and using the labyrinth for chakra meditations, and the process you described sounds very similar to what I've been thinking. So it's just, I love the universality of it, and regardless of I guess the language that we use around it, the discovery, as long as we're curious, and that's something I keep coming back to in my own vocabulary and my own efforts in life lately, is I want to get more and more curious just about everything. Keep asking questions and keep going deeper, because I think the more certain I become about anything in my own beliefs, the more I cut myself off from that curiosity. And so something about the labyrinth that reminds me about that is the continuous nature of this path. Even though there is that transcendent function, it's not like that's the end and then we win and life is over. No,
It continues.
It continues.
It continues. Yeah.
So that it reaches another new state where I can get curiouser and curiouser.
And I think the labyrinth really allows that in us. Is that curiosity on some level? I think it demands it. I think there's a demand for that. Those people, those of us that get really hooked by labyrinths, we're forever asking questions. We're forever meeting other people and going, what do you think? How do you work? What's your connection with it? And that's the beauty, because it just goes out into the world. And there's a massive resurgence at the moment on labyrinths. And I think it's a really important time to be involved with labyrinths and to encourage others.
That's true.
Wonderful. Well, let's, it's been so wonderful.
Yeah,
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
This golden thread. Yeah. So I think what we should do is, from Pennsylvania, from Alan, you're in Maryland.
Right now I'm in Queenstown, Maryland, going to visit my my little sister, actually. So,
but
really grateful to have you on, Jacqui, and just fascinating conversation. And I hope we continue and have you on again. Yeah,
please keep in touch. And I'm really happy to send you some of the stuff that I do as well, so you can have a look.
Absolutely.
So that'd be great. Yeah.
We would love that. And, we didn't really get into it, but one of the things that will make Golden Thread Labyrinths very unique is these audio experiences that you can scan before walking in. If you aren't as familiar with labyrinths and you want to focus on stress reduction or grounding or grief, dealing with grief, whatever that is, you certainly would be a person we'd love to co-write or co-record.
Absolutely. Be really happy to help in whatever way I can. I think your podcast is really interesting, and I think it's going to go places. I think you've hit on something. It's brilliant.
Awesome.
Glad to hear it. Well, thank you so much from Golden Thread Labyrinths. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, and take care.
Have a great one.
And you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.